All the mass shootings recently, it is hard not to wonder if there are some similarities, and that if identified early enough and correctly, if it could actually help us stop a potential mass shooting before it happened. Indeed, the broader academic research community, criminologists who study this type of thing, they are very interested in this question and keenly aware of it with the number of mass shootings that we have covered and had to deal with recently. And the research is young, it's not broadly conclusive, but researchers say they are beginning to develop a type of mass shooter profile that could lead us down that path. So I talked to a professor and criminologist, Alex Del Carmen. He's at Tarleton State University. And we talked about what the research could help us know about shooters and where it's headed going forward.
I think you're definitely onto something in the sense that we criminologists over the past maybe 30 years have looked at, patterns and typologies of individuals. Most of our research has focused on serial killers. And right after 9/11, we almost became obsessed with the idea of profiling terrorists. And what we are finding out now is, and the research is very early, but we are connecting the dots, so to speak. And what we are finding is that there are patterns. There seems to be a typology, if you want to call it that, of these active shooters, right? One of the things that we have learned is that most of them, not exclusively, but most of them belong to Generation Z, which has a particular age range. And as I'm sure you've seen the reports, anywhere between the age of 18 to the age of 24, 25 years. We're seeing a pattern of that. Secondly, we also see that they are radicalized in the dark web. They have dark web connections, right? So this is not the person that's browsing Google and finding out how they're going to come up with a home device or an explosive device. These are folks that have been for weeks or months, in some cases years. It goes beyond playing a video game. It's basically going into these sort of dark tunnels within the dark web, where they are learning things, they are fantasizing about various acts. And that leads then to the things we're finding out now, ex post facto, after the events take place, which have to do with planification. One of the things that we have found is that many of them plan out their egress and regress to those areas. They know exactly how they're going to come in. They have surveilled the area. It's almost like a person with military background, but yet that person has been exposed to the dark web, and therefore they're picking up all of these sort of hints from there in terms of doing that.
So let's look at 5 of the most recent mass shootings that have made major national headlines. We got Highland Park, Illinois, and on that same day, the 4th, another shooting in Philadelphia. Then there was the Tulsa, Oklahoma mass shooting at St. Francis Hospital, in Uvalde, Texas, the shooting at Robb Elementary School, and then at Buffalo, New York, shooting at a local grocery store. If you dig into the details of these 5 recent shootings, 4 of the 6 shooters involved were all males 21 years old or younger. In every shooting except the one in Philly, an AR-15 style rifle was used, that confirmed by investigators. And then in 3 of the 5 shootings, investigators quickly were able to find an online trail by the shooters before the shooting happened. And in some cases, that online trail allowed them to easily and quickly establish a clear motive.
Do we know the access point? If one of the consistencies is access to the dark web or something deeper than generic internet browsing, is the research developed yet enough to understand how someone goes from the generic average internet user into this place that affects them so much?
Yeah, so I don't think the research is there yet, but what we do know, however, is that they begin, like everybody else does, with a sort of generic internet, browsing. And then what, so you got to remember too, that this is part of a generational access to information, where folks my age, although not immune from committing crimes, but folks my age are going to hardly know how to use, the basic browsing capabilities, right? For the most part. But folks that come in from a Generation Z, they were born with a laptop on the one hand and a cell phone on the other. And so these are individuals that know exactly how to download music, serve as rappers online, become what's called now influencers, right? So these are individuals that are absolutely, 100% integrated in a culture of social media. And so then that then lends itself to the mystery of those prohibited sites, those sites that are not common, some of which may be illegal, some of which may be based overseas. And so then that's where that process begins. So it's like everything else in life, the deviant engages in more deviance and then becomes addicted to it, to the point that they become seduced by it, addicted, and then I would argue radicalized by it, that they want to display in real life their fantasy that they have been showing online for a number of months or a number of years.
When you talk about these suspects interacting with these sites, it does beg the question, what burden do some of these sites have to monitor or flag activity that could fall into this category? What historically or do we know, or what context do we have now that would help us understand, how to not let it get that far, and how to sort of preemptively intervene when things are getting into this sort of, dangerous, radicalized, as you say, territory?
So one of the issues that your question begs for me to visit is the debate that has been going on now for over 200 years in this country between the First Amendment and the ability that we have to regulate behavior, right? In this case, obviously online, which is fairly recent in our history as a country. But the first thing that a good lawyer will tell you is, well, this person hasn't committed a crime. All they're doing is expressing their art, expressing themselves in a medium that, it's itself adequate and perhaps normative to Generation Z. And so the fact that they can fantasize about it, it's not person specific, it's not individual specific, it's just a general fantasy. Now, let's just, for argument's sake, say that we are going to then impose some sort of a censorship on some of these websites that, first of all, I don't think we have the ability to do that even if we wanted to, but let's just hypothetically say that we do. The next step after that is many of these folks are programmers themselves, and they're gonna start programming and creating their own quasi-reality, which is going to lead to that component. So for me, Clark, the issue is not how do we remove the weapon from the potential criminal, as much as how do we know that that person may be a potential criminal, right? And I would caution your audience in the following: not everyone, in fact, most people that go to the dark web, do not exhibit these signs, and they don't go out and shoot innocent people and kill people, right? So we have to be careful with generalities. So the $10,000 question is, how can we identify from a population that accesses the dark web, from a subpopulation that may actually fantasize about criminality and violent crime, how can we then look at that subpopulation and single out and be able to effectively know before the act happens which of those pose a viable threat, have the ability to carry out an incident, and are going to do it, right? And that's the $1 million question that we just can't answer based on the research and where we are right now.
After this most recent group of mass shootings, the conversation has no doubt gotten some attention on how to regulate these online sites, specifically something happening there called gore posting, where people in these rooms or these online places post really violent images. That, of course, in addition to gun reform that you've heard about. Dr. Del Carmen says that historically the law is behind technology and research, and that's where some of the catch-up will have to happen. He says that with the scrutiny on these shootings, there could be more research, more money poured into research that will hopefully get to some conclusions and some actionable steps that could allow people to identify vulnerable persons and maybe even find intervention strategies that would prevent the next mass shooting.